Hey, Ralph here, Zatara Transaction Advisors here in Saskatchewan. And I was just going to go over kind of how to put an offer on a business and what a typical LOI looks like. This is our LOI template. So, this is what I use to help buyers draft an offer on a company. And so, our executive summary is going to show, the vendor note, the earnout, the rollover, the cash at close, and then the total purchase price. So, this is your total enterprise value. This is kind of what you value the company for, right? And then this is your capital stack, right? So a vendor note would be a loan from the vendor. So I'm going to buy your company for $1 million, but you're going to have to loan me 20% of that. And I'll pay you that 20% over the next 5 years, right? Earnout would be conditional on how the company performs after. So I'm going to pay you X. And if the company performs at Y benchmark, I'll pay you Z more every year for whatever. Roll of retained equity. So that would be that you have to keep a certain percent of ownership in the business. So it could either be preferred shares or common shares, whatever. But you're going to keep a percentage of the ownership in the business. And then cash at close is all the money I put in plus whatever I borrow. And that's the total purchase price. Then you got your timelines. So you got your expected diligence period. So that'll give you kind of when conditions are to be removed, right? Your closing date, LOI signing date would be the date this is signed. And that kind of everything has to happen in a timely fashion in these transactions because everybody, the close has to happen on a certain date. So everybody's working together to get it done on that date. And so the bank, you, the landlords, the suppliers, whatever relationships need to be in place in order to get the deal done, everything has to be done before that trigger date, right? Um, yeah, and then key terms would be, if you've got an employment agreement with the current owner, so the guy's going to stick around for the next, I don't know, 5 years or 5 months or 5 days or whatever, maybe a non compete. All these key terms, you kind of list those out just in the executive summary. So it's easy for a guy to look at it and say, okay, does this make sense to me? Right. Then this is kind of all the legal stuff. So it's like an actual letter. Right. So the vendor is the owner of this company, and the vendor is going to sell me the company, and we're all going to enter into a either definitive agreement, so asset purchase agreement or share purchase agreement. It's going to be drafted by the purchaser's legal counsel. So this describes how the whole transaction is going to take place, right? And then, the definitive agreement is going to replace the letter of intent. It can either be shares or asset. This is a share sale. An asset sale would be slightly different. Um, so this says, you, the vendor, are going to provide me the documents I need in a timely manner. And then this letter is non binding except for B, which is all this stuff here. So let's kind of go through it. So you got your purchase price, and basically you got your deposit, your vendor note, your earnout provisions, and then whatever is payable at closing to be adjusted for the working capital. So a lot of times you're going to have a working capital adjustment. You might have a work in process adjustment. So included assets, cash-free, debt-free transaction. So this is kind of your allocation of your purchase price. So how much of this is going towards goodwill? How much of it's going towards working capital? How much of it is going towards the furniture, fixtures, and equipment? You could also allocate it towards like lists. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could allocate the purchase price. You could even allocate it to the non-compete, or you could allocate it to what's it called? The consulting agreement or the training agreement or the employment agreement. There's all kinds of ways you could allocate this purchase price, right? So then excluded assets, a lot of times businesses will have assets within the company that are not required to operate the company. So, for example, if they bought a vehicle through the company and the owner uses that as his daily driver, well, that vehicle is not necessary for the operation of the business, so the buyer doesn't want it. Or we got one right now where it was easier for the guy to buy his acreage through the business because the business had more buying power, more credit than he did personally, or it would have taken longer, I guess. And they had to close quicker, and so he needed to borrow the money today. And so that farm and all the equipment and everything is found in the business. Well, the next guy doesn't need that equipment to run this particular business, right? So all that stuff has to be removed from the business for the new owner. So the new owner is not buying those excluded assets, right? Closing date, we already talked about that. Allocation of the purchase price, we kind of already talked about that. Vendor notes, so the terms of a vendor note, pretty straightforward. You're going to have basically how many years, the amortization period, the rate, and the amount. And then security, if there is security. And then typically nobody wants a prepayment penalty. And a lot of times, this is a side note, but a lot of times the vendor might want to see your personal financials and your credit report because they're effectively acting as the bank. So they're going to want to see all the documents you provided to the bank. They're probably going to want at least what's it called? A sophisticated seller is going to want those. Earnout, we already kind of talked about that. It's going to be paid in however installments. Installments are going to be blah, blah, blah. It's going to be based on either revenue or profitability or whatever. It's going to be how it's going to be paid, the target, the total amount that we're gonna pay you. Yeah. And then working capital. Working capital is typically something that the accountants kind of get caught up on or they fight over. It's better to just put it in the offer. So how much actual liquidity is required to run the business, including the inventory, right? So all your short-term assets minus short-term liabilities, net of excess cash or excess working capital. And so there's ways to calculate that where you just look at the actual operating working capital and you take out everything that's not required for the operation of the business to calculate exactly how much liquidity is required to be in the business in order to operate it. Inventory is another thing. Yeah. Assume liabilities. So that's something too. So this price does not necessarily include whatever long-term liabilities that are assumed. This LOI, for example, assumes that no, you're going to pay off all the long-term liabilities, and I'm going to get my own. All that being said, well, if you have a situation like we had a couple of years ago, where interest rates went from whatever it was, I don't know what the interest rates were. Right now, I think a mortgage is like 4.25. I think it went all the way up to 6.25 or 7 or something. Who knows? Point is if the long-term debt interest rate is more favorable, then a lot of times it makes sense for the buyer. It's added value for the buyer to go and assume those liabilities, right? Because they're going to pay less interest. So their total capital cost is going to be less. Employees, so all the employee liabilities, you're going to indemnify me, and you're going to pay off all of the taxes and everything else related to that. Yes, then here are your conditions. So financing, due diligence, definitive agreement, and then this is I'm glad that they actually add this in. This whole, for clarity, the buyer's lawyer is going to draft the agreement, the definitive agreement, APA or SPA, whatever, asset purchase agreement or share purchase agreement, and then the seller is going to have his lawyer review it, and that's kind of how these are done. But I like how it's specified in here. So you got your training period, your non-compete, non-solicitation period, the financial statements. So they're going to have to close everything out, right? With the government, the accountants are going to file that. And then these closing statements have to be finalized within 90 days after the transaction. So that's going to help for calculating. Depends on if they're assuming the balance sheet or not, but it's going to help for calculating the working capital as well. There might be a post-closing adjustment for work in process and working capital. There is no WIP clause in here, and I do think a WIP clause should be in here. And I when it comes up, I add it. And then, well, I help draft it, and then the lawyers finalize it. So it's not me that is providing the legal advice. I'm just providing them the template that we use, and then helping them kind of fill it in, and then the lawyer is required to finalize it. So not a me thing. Yeah, so here's one that's pretty wild. So in Saskatchewan, if you do an asset sale, you're required to pay PST on all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So not fixtures, but furniture and equipment that you purchase. So all the assets that are not affixed to the property, you're required to pay PST on, and not the inventory, so not the current assets, which is kind of interesting. Amendments, real estate clause. Sometimes there's a real estate that's inside the business, and so you put a bunch of different stuff in here depending on what you're going to do with that real estate. So are you going to buy it, or are you going to assume the lease, or are you going to have to enter into a new lease? Is that one of the conditions that, you know, the lease has to be transferred, the supplier contract has to be transferred, whatever, right? Or you got to enter into the buying group. We had one of those. And then so the legally binding part, exclusive dealing. So you're no longer going to advertise this for sale. You're dealing with me now. You're going to keep operating this in the normal course of business. So there's not going to be any material changes from when we sign this thing till when it closes. You're not going to do anything funky like have a retirement sale. A lot of times sellers can do goofy things whenever it's time to sell. They're trying to get every nickel, so they may start selling gift cards or having a retirement sale or selling off certain assets. Well, if you do that, the business is no longer what we agreed on in this LOI, right? So that you got to maintain it in the normal course of business. Don't take your foot off the pedal. Keep growing the sucker. Governing law. This agreement was in BC. That's where Scott's out of. But this changes for Saskatchewan. This is just the template, right? Severability. Oh yeah. Just because one little thing in this agreement is wrong doesn't mean the whole agreement's off, right? Doesn't mean the agreement is null and void. Public announcements. You're not going to, until this thing is done, you're not going to tell anybody about it, right? Confidentiality. Obviously, keep everything confidential. Electronic delivery. There you go. Disclosure. Everybody's going to be honest with each other. Nobody's going to keep secrets. Everybody's going to be as forthcoming and as needed. Everything's got to be full disclosure if we're doing a transaction, because if something pops up, if there's a skeleton in the closet and it pops up during diligence, transaction's over. Right? That's typically how it works. Non-residency. There you go. So that's a quick 15-minute kind of overview of the LOI and how to put an offer on a business. This doesn't go into any. Maybe I'll do that next. Kind of do a quick analysis of what is a reasonable offer and not a reasonable offer, or what makes sense for a buyer, and how to analyze that. I don't know if I'll do that. Maybe another day. Anyways, Ralph out. God bless. Bye now.